A young girl went out for a walk with her friend and disappeared without a trace. Dozens of police officers and concerned residents joined the search for her, but they couldn't find her. Sometime later, strange events began to occur in this case. An unknown person started leaving messages for the police around the city, claiming he was involved in the girl's disappearance. With each message, he gave detectives clues that could lead them to him. But despite all this, it took 30 years to discover his identity and learn the tragic truth. April Tinsley was born on March 18, 1980, in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She was the eldest child in her family, part of the children's choir at the local church, and attended elementary school. In her free time, she loved hanging out with friends. They would stroll the streets, visit each other's homes, and generally have a good time. On Friday, April 1st, 1988, when April was 8, she came home from school early and planned to go out and play as soon as possible. April had lunch and asked her mom if she could go visit her friend Nicole, who lived just a few hundred meters away. Her mother agreed, as she had many times before. Nicole lived only a few minutes' walk away, and their neighborhood was considered very safe. Her mother told her to call from Nicole's house as soon as she arrived and gave April an umbrella. It was almost 3 in the afternoon, and the forecast predicted a light rain soon. A few minutes later, April called her mom from Nicole's house, and her mother told her to return home by 4 o'clock. But when the time came, April did not return. Her mother started worrying that she might be caught in the rain and called Nicole's house. Nicole's mother answered and recounted a strange story. According to her, April and Nicole had gone to play on a nearby playground. While they were there, it started to rain, and April realized she had left her umbrella at Nicole's house. She told her friend she would go back to get it and then head home, since she had promised her mom to return when it started raining. Nicole decided to visit another friend's house, and the girls went their separate ways. However, Nicole's mom said April never came back for her umbrella, even though she had left the playground almost an hour ago. Upon hearing this, April's mother became seriously concerned. She immediately told her husband their daughter was missing, and they started searching for her. Several neighbors quickly joined them upon hearing about April's disappearance, and together they combed the streets, connecting their home to Nicole's and the playground. But their efforts yielded no results, prompting the parents to contact the police. Officers arrived at their home, obtained a photograph and description of April, and began searching. Within hours, dozens of neighbors joined in, wanting to help the Tinsley family find their daughter. The search area expanded to several kilometers around the girls' route, but no clues were found. By nightfall, the police began to suspect they were dealing with an abduction. If April had gotten lost or encountered trouble on her way home, she would have been found by now. However, it seemed as if she had vanished into thin air. The next day, the search area was expanded, and news of April's disappearance spread throughout the city. Despite more police and volunteers joining the effort, they still could not find her. This continued for 3 days until on April 4th, a man called the police after spotting something strange in a ditch while jogging along a highway 30 kilometers from April's home. Running alongside the fields, he noticed something unusual in the ditch, approached it, and realized it was a human body. Police arrived at the scene and saw it was April. She was fully clothed, except for one shoe. Officers couldn't find any obvious injuries on her body, but were almost certain she had been murdered. They believed the unknown perpetrator had killed her elsewhere, and then dumped her body in the ditch. Close to the scene, the police also found an adult toy, but they were unsure if it was related to the case. Eventually, they found April's other shoe on the opposite side of the road, several hundred meters from her body. Medical examiners concluded that the cause of death was strangulation and that the victim had been assaulted. They also determined that she had died at most 2 days before her body was discovered, indicating that the killer had kept her alive for some time. The examiners extracted biological material from the perpetrator, But back then, the FBI's DNA database didn't exist, and DNA analysis in forensics was still in its infancy. Because of this, detectives had to hope they would find some new leads, which they soon did. After the body was found, investigators appealed to the public through the media, receiving numerous tips. Among the most interesting were two. One man called the police and said he had driven past the spot where the girl's body was found and saw an old blue pickup truck parked on the side of the road. Detectives speculated it might belong to the killer, and the witness had unwittingly seen the moment the perpetrator disposed of the body. The second tip was even more valuable. A woman living along the route from the playground to Nicole's house said she saw a girl who looked like April on April 1st. According to the witness, as the girl walked down the road, an old blue pickup truck pulled up next to her, and a few seconds later, it drove off with the girl inside. Because the truck blocked her view, the witness didn't see how the girl got inside. Nonetheless, her testimony provided the detectives with their first significant lead. The woman also described the driver. He was a white man around 30 years old, with light brown or reddish hair. Based on this information, the police created a composite sketch of the suspect and circulated it in the media, along with a description of his truck, hoping someone would recognize him. Soon, the FBI joined the investigation. Together with the police, they examined the possible involvement of all previously convicted sex offenders living near April's home and tried to find new leads. At one point, they were told that the suspect resembled a man involved in various crimes and known for his interest in Satanism. Investigators checked this person but couldn't prove his involvement. Nevertheless, they arrested him for another crime. The police continued to follow up on tips and investigate various people, but made no significant progress. This continued for several months, and eventually the detectives hit a dead end. Notably, during the search for April's killer, the police uncovered several other crimes against children and arrested the perpetrators. But the person responsible for April's murder remained at large. For the next few years, there were no developments in the case. But in May 1990, everything suddenly changed. A teenager living 20 kilometers from where April's body was found discovered a message on his barn that shocked him. It was from the killer, saying he was responsible for April's murder and planned to kill again. The perpetrator also asked if the police had found the second shoe. This immediately led detectives to believe that the author of the message was indeed April's killer, not a prankster. The detail about the shoe had never been made public, and only the murderer could have known it. Another interesting point was that the message was initially written in pencil and then traced over with a marker. This led investigators to think the killer might have left the message months before, and it had gone unnoticed. Maybe he was unhappy with this and returned to make it more visible with a marker. The police decided to publish photos of the message, hoping someone would recognize the handwriting. But this led nowhere. A few months later, the people of Fort Wayne were shocked by the news that the police had found the body of a 7-year-old girl on the other side of the city. She had been assaulted, and the cause of death was strangulation. Given the clear similarity to April's case, the police immediately suspected the same person was responsible. However, FBI profilers had a different opinion, believing they were dealing with two separate crimes. There was no progress in either case until 1995, when the police concluded that the second victim's killer was a family friend who had since passed away. Ultimately, this case was closed, and the connection to April's murder was dismissed. Detectives also hoped the killer would leave new messages. The first message made it clear he enjoyed taunting the police and feeling untouchable. But years passed, and no new messages were found. This continued until 2004, when a new twist in the case suddenly emerged. A girl from Fort Wayne found a bag in her bicycle basket containing a note. What she read horrified her. She immediately took the note to her parents, who then called the police. The note read, "Hello, dear. I've been watching you. I'm the one who kidnapped, assaulted, and killed April Tinsley. I have a gift for you. You will be my next victim if you don't report this to the police. If I don't see this note in tomorrow's local news, I'll burn down your house, killing everyone except you. You will be mine." The police had no doubt that the author of the note was indeed April's killer. Inside the package with the note was a used contraceptive, which was immediately sent to the lab. By 2004, DNA analysis was widely used, and experts had long extracted a profile from the semen found on the victim's body. Now, the analysis showed that the biological material from the contraceptive belonged to the same person, but his DNA wasn't in the FBI database. The police reopened April's case and soon received reports of another note. Another girl found a paper with similar text. In it, the criminal claimed to have killed April Tinsley and threatened to kill the girl. The package with the note also contained a used contraceptive with the same man's DNA. In the following months, the police received 2 more calls about similar notes found by other girls. This time, the criminal included Polaroid photos of his genitalia. The police tried to find clues in these images that could help them identify the perpetrator. However, all they managed to notice was the bed linen with a green pattern that was on the killer's bed. They attempted to track down stores selling similar sets, but it led nowhere. Thus, in just a few months, the criminal left 4 notes, but then fell silent again. For years. In 2009, the FBI released a profile of the killer, including known physical characteristics from a witness's description. They hoped to get new leads, but it led nowhere. In 2015, detectives reopened the investigation and decided to contact Parabon, a company that had recently started offering an innovative service to law enforcement agencies. Experts created predicted portraits of DNA holders from their samples, and this new approach had already helped solve several cases. Investigators reached out to this company, and Parabon provided them with a portrait of the suspect. The portrait was published online and sent to the media. Detectives hoped someone would recognize this person, but luck wasn't on their side. They didn't receive any new leads, but the police weren't ready to give up. A few years later, in 2018, they turned to Parabon again. This time, they aimed to use an innovative approach called genetic genealogy. This method involves experts taking a DNA sample and searching public genetic databases for any relatives, even distant ones. They usually find several thousand people, then study their family trees and try to identify someone who fits the criteria of the criminal, such as gender, age, and location at the time of the crime. The uniqueness of the method is that the DNA holder doesn't need to be in any database, and they can be identified exclusively through a long chain of relatives. Detectives on April's case submitted the killer's DNA sample to Parabon again and waited. The process of finding relatives and studying their family trees takes many months, as experts have to analyze vast amounts of data. But eventually they reported back to the detectives, having traced the DNA holder's family tree to 2 brothers living in Fort Wayne. The police now had to determine which brother was the killer. They put both men under surveillance and collected their trash, from which experts were able to extract DNA samples. Soon they called the detectives with the long-awaited news. 30 years after the murder, they had a complete match. The semen found on the victim's body and in the contraceptives matched the DNA of one of the brothers, 59-year-old John Miller. He lived in a town called Graybill, near where April's body was found. At the time of the murder, he was 29 and living in the same trailer. The police now just needed to obtain a direct DNA sample from Miller and interrogate him. They arrived at his trailer and said they wanted to ask him a few questions at the police station. The man asked what they were interested in, and one officer asked him to guess. Miller then looked at them and said, "April Tinsley." The detectives didn't rush things and took him to the station for a proper interrogation. Throughout the ride, Miller talked to them about unrelated topics and seemed quite relaxed. During the interrogation, he didn't deny anything and confessed to kidnapping and killing April. According to Miller, he had specifically gone to Fort Wayne that day, driving around the streets looking for a girl to abduct. When he saw April on an empty street, he stopped and told her to get into his car. According to him, April silently agreed, which the detectives found strange. However, the witness didn't hear any screams or see signs of a struggle, so the police didn't rule out that the criminal somehow managed to persuade her to get into the car voluntarily. He then took her to his trailer, assaulted her, and killed her. He then put her body in his pickup truck, drove to the fields, and dumped her in a ditch. He also admitted that the toy found at the scene belonged to him. 6 months after his arrest, when the trial began, Miller, advised by his lawyer, pleaded not guilty. To avoid dragging out the trial, he was offered a deal. Initially, the prosecutor sought the death penalty, but if Miller confessed, the sentence would be reduced to life imprisonment. Given that execution dates in the U.S. are often delayed for decades, this decision was understandable. Miller would have spent many years in prison anyway, and there was no guarantee that the execution would occur before he died of natural causes. Eventually, Miller agreed to the deal, confessed to the judge, and received an 80-year prison sentence. He will have the possibility of parole only in 2058, when he will be 99 years old. April's mother, who attended the sentencing, was disappointed that the criminal didn't receive the death penalty. However, given his age, it's unlikely he'll ever be released. April's father couldn't attend the court due to health issues, but he thanked the investigators for their work and for finally finding the murderer of his daughter. The detectives who worked on the case still believe that for some reason, Miller wanted to be caught. He attracted attention and taunted the detectives, risking getting caught by the police. Even if he couldn't have known the progress scientists would make with DNA, leaving his samples was very risky. Firstly, he could have been imprisoned for another crime, and his DNA would have been entered into the database, immediately matching the April case. Secondly, Miller could have easily been seen by witnesses while leaving the notes, and he was very lucky each time. All this led the investigators to believe that he was at least prepared for the possibility of being identified or even wanted it. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments.